Okay, everyone, so today we're going to be talking about comparing and ordering numbers. You should, if you don't already, you need your notebook out in front of you so that you're writing these notes along with the video. You will be required to upload an image of your notes so I know that you're writing all of the information down. All right, so first, let's review. There are some symbols that you've already learned that are the symbols that we use to compare numbers. They look like this, and just so that in case you forgot, the smaller end is your less than side, and the larger opening is your greater than symbol, or the greater than side of the symbol. We could always flip the symbol the other way. Again, this is still my greater than side, and the smaller end is my less than side. I could also have less than or equal to. If it has a line underneath, that is the equal to sign. So again, the smaller end is the less than side, the larger end is the greater than side. I could also have greater than or equal to, where the opening is my greater than side and the smaller end is my less than side. So these are the symbols that we're going to be using to compare. The other thing that we need to review is how to convert. How to convert a fraction to a decimal. Now, fractions are division problems. So when I have a fraction like 3/4, I'm actually reading this as 3. The bar means divide by 4. So when I type that into the calculator, I will type in 3 divided by 4. Something really important is just remembering that you read the fraction from top to bottom. I'm going to type it into the calculator as 3 divided by 4, which converts it to a decimal of 0.75. If this was 2 3/4, I'm still only going to type the fraction into the calculator. The fraction is 0.75, and I'm just going to put a whole number of 2 in front of it to do that conversion. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to review is vocabulary, because we are going to have some word problems that we're going to be working with. So if I need to put numbers in order from least, to greatest, the vocabulary that you might see are words like ascending. So ascending means to go from least to greatest, like an airplane ascending into the sky. Other things is if the word problem is about the fastest time, that's also indicating least to greatest, or the slowest speeds. Again, that is least to greatest. So then the opposite of this, obviously, like some of the problems just say place in order from least to greatest. So those are a little bit more obvious. But these are the vocabulary words and the scenarios that are a little bit more confusing and harder to keep track of. So the other way is greatest to least. And some words that would indicate greatest to least are words like descending. If you're putting numbers in descending order, it means like going down. So that would be starting at the top and working your way down. So from greatest to least. Or the slowest time. Think about that. If someone is running a race and they were the slowest person in the race, then that means that they had the greatest time. So the slowest time or fastest speed. So obviously the faster a car goes, sorry about that, the fastest speed. So the faster a car goes, of course, like the higher the speed is. So just some vocabulary words that I want you to be on the lookout for as we are working our way through this unit. Okay, so now that we've gotten through the review part of the video, now let's actually talk about how to order the numbers. So again, as we're going through this, you need to be writing everything down in your notebook. You will be required to upload a picture of your notes at the end of this video in order to submit this assignment. So example number 1, we're going to place these numbers in ascending order. Now that's that vocabulary word that we talked about, making sure that you're identifying words like ascending in the problem to know that that means we need to go from least to greatest. Ascending means to go up, so that's why we're starting with the numbers, the smallest numbers, all the way to, and ordering to get to the greatest numbers. So let's start with step number 1. Okay, so for step 1, you're going to convert all the values to the same form. Most often, you're going to convert to decimals. I feel like with us having the calculator, that's the easiest form to convert to, so that we can order these numbers a little bit easier. When you are using decimals, remember that all of the numbers have to have the same number of place values after the decimal in order to make the comparison a little bit more obvious and easier to do. So we're going to start out with the square root of 4.5, and when I enter this into my calculator, you're going to type second square root 4.5 and then enter. You get a decimal value of about 2.121. So I'm going to go ahead and use 3 decimal places. My next number that I have on my list is -4/5, which is -0.8, and I'm going to go ahead and add those extra decimal places so that all of my numbers have 3 decimal places after the decimal, 3 place values after the decimal. The next number is 10%. Now, if you don't remember, percentages mean out of 100. So really 10% is the same as doing, so I'm just write 10% is the same as doing 10 divided by 100. And we already talked about how to do that division in the calculator. You're going to get a value of 0.1, and then we're going to add in our extra decimal places so that they all have the same number of decimal places. The next number is already a decimal, which is -0.4, and again with the extra decimal places. And then finally the last number is a whole number of -3, and that's going to be -3.000. Now, again, as we are doing this, just keeping the same number of decimal places, I chose 3 places, but you don't have to always do 3 decimal places. You could just do 1 decimal place if the decimals work out that way. You could do 2 decimal places, but really, I mean, in our grade, we wouldn't do anything more than 3 decimal places. All right, so now let's move on to step 2. Now that we have our work and we have all of our decimals listed, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort these numbers into 2 lists, my positive numbers and my negative numbers. Okay, it looks like I skipped a number. Let's just go back and add it. The other number on the list was 2, and +2, and again we're going to add in those extra zeros so that they all have the same number of decimal places. Okay, so I'm going to separate my numbers into my positive numbers and my negative numbers, and I'm going to be using those decimal values. So I'm going to write my negative numbers in red just to help this be a little bit more visible as far as what numbers go where. And the other negative number we had on our list was -0.4. And remember, we added those extra decimal places. And now I'm going to put my positive numbers in green. We had -3.000. Oh, excuse me, that's a negative number. Oops. -3.000. Now for my positive numbers, We had 2.121. We had 10%, which was 0.1, and we added in extra zeros. And we had the whole number of 2, and we added in those extra zeros. So what we're going to do next is we are going to compare the place values of the numbers, and we're going to set up an organizer for our answers by drawing a blank for each value and labeling each end. So remember that we're ordering in ascending order. So ascending means I need to start with my least numbers, which are my negatives, and I need to go to my greatest numbers, which would be on the positive side. So I'm starting with the negatives and going to the positives. Again, if you don't have a mix of negatives and positives, then you start from your smallest number and you're working your way to your largest number. The other thing I want to do, I want to make sure I include all 6 of my numbers. You saw earlier in the video how easy it is to forget one. So I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to put in 6 blanks. You know what, that's a little better, so they're all on the same line. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare my place values. Now this part is really important. When you're working with your negative numbers, the number that is furthest away from 0 is actually your smallest number. So negative 3.000 would be my smallest value. And then I'm going to mark that off of my list. I'm done with that number. Next, between 0.800 and 0.400. 0.800 is, and I know this isn't totally like a good mathematical description, but the number that looks the biggest on the negative end is actually the smallest. So now that I've kind of gotten rid of that, the next number is that's negative 0.4, and that takes care of all of my negative numbers, and we know that negative numbers are always smaller than positive numbers. So now I'm going to move over to my positive side, and my thinking is also going to change because the negatives, the smallest number is the one that looks the biggest. But with your positive numbers, the smallest number is the one that looks the smallest. So 0.1 and then 2.000 and finally 2.121. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do is we are going to convert all of these back to our original numbers that we started with at the beginning of the problem. So let's just kind of convert each one individually. Negative 3, this did not have all of those decimal places, it was just negative 3. Negative 0.8 was actually negative 4/5. Negative 0.4 did not have all of those zeros. It was just negative 0.4. 0.1, if we look back at our original list, was actually 10%. 2.0 was just the number 2. So we kind of had to make all of these changes to the numbers so that it made it easier for us to put them in order. But at the end of the problem, you have to revert back to their original form. And finally, the square root, 2.121 was the square root of 4.5. And this is our final answer. Our numbers have been put in order, in ascending order, which means from least to greatest. Okay, so let's try another example. Just going back through all of those steps. Make sure that you write this example down. This time we are actually going in descending order, And remember, when you think of descending, think going down. So we're starting at the top, which is our greatest numbers, and working our way down to our smallest numbers. Step number 1 is that we're going to convert everything to a decimal spot with the same number of place values. So negative 5.3, we're going to... Now, while I'm converting these numbers to decimal values, I also want to make sure that I keep track of my original values, because if you remember in the last example, at the end, we're going to have to convert everything back to these original numbers. I'm going to do this with 2 decimal places for this problem. 135%. Remember, for percentages, you divide by 100. That gives us 1.35. So I'm going to do 135, and then I'm going to divide by 100, and that gives me my decimal value. I can show you off to the side what I did. 135 divided by 100. Anytime you have a percentage, you always want to make sure you divide by 100 to do that decimal conversion. 1.27 is staying the same. 2 is changing to 2.00 so that we have this. I want 2 decimal places in all my numbers. So that's why I made that minor change. Then I have negative 5.13, which is staying the same, and it already has 2 decimal places, which works. And then finally, the square root of 22 is equal to 4.69. All right, so now that I have step 1 done, where I've gotten everything converted to a decimal with the same number of places, my next step is step 2, where I'm going to separate my positives and negatives. And then just for visual effects, I'm going to put my negative numbers in red. Okay, got that one. This one. Looks like those are my only 2. 5.13. I'm going to put my positive numbers in green. That is 1.35 and 2.00 and 4.69. So I've gotten this number, and this number. I'm missing 1.27. Notice how I'm going back and just verifying that I have all of the numbers from the problem that I'm supposed to have. That way I'm not missing anything. All right, step 3. I'm going to go back to the problem, making sure I know that I'm putting these numbers in order from greatest to least. And there are 6 numbers. 1, 2, 3. Yep. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And since I'm going from greatest to least, I'm going to start with my positive numbers and then go to my negative numbers. So my positive numbers, my largest number is 4.69. My next number is 2.00. So I'm done and I'm done. I'm marking those off the list. Next, between 1.35 and 1.27, we can look at our decimal places, and 1.35 is larger, followed by 1.27. Now that when we switch over to our negatives, remember that our mind has to switch as well, and our thinking has to switch. Instead of the number that it actually looks the smallest is actually the biggest. So I'm going to start out with negative 5.13. And then I'm going to put negative 5.30 as my next number. Finally, we can move on to step number 4, which is where we actually have to convert all of the numbers into their original format. So I'm going to draw in my 6 spaces. I'm going to draw in some arrows to kind of just help me out with connecting where they go in what position they go in. 4.69, when I go back and look, it actually is the square root of 22. 2.00, we added in extra zeros, so we need to change it back to just the 2 by itself. Then 1.35 was actually 135%. 1.27, we made no changes to that number. Negative 5.13, again, we made no changes to that number. And then finally, negative 5.30, we added in an extra 0, so we just need to take it off and write negative 5.3. Now, this is the final list that I would look for as far as my numbers being in order. They are in order from greatest to least. Now, just make sure that that concludes this example. Make sure that you have these notes written. You will be required to upload an image of the notes, just so I make sure that you're following along with the video. And then you have a small assignment to complete for today, and we will continue working on this topic for tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye.